Hi, this is Susanna Miller-Rains. I'm a community support specialist here at the Center for Leadership and Disability at Georgia State University, and I am with...
Hi, I'm Allison O'Hara. I'm a behavior specialist here at the Center for Leadership and Disability at Georgia State University.
And we're here to talk to you about radically redefining acceptance, accepting and including individuals with challenging behaviors in your camp or congregation. First, we want to talk about why it's important to include individuals with significant challenging behaviors in your community organization. I think it is really important that all kids have an opportunity to be included in their community, including in camps and in congregations. There's a wealth of learning opportunities that these types of programs give to children, and we should not be leaving children out just because they have significant and challenging behaviors.
Additionally, there's a lot of research to prove the effectiveness of prevention and intervention strategies when trying to reduce challenging behavior. So there are a lot of options to include these kids and teens who are exhibiting challenging behaviors. And additionally, many of these children have already been isolated from community settings. Maybe they've been isolated from making friends. And so they, more than anyone, need the opportunity to practice some social skills, practice some emotional regulation in a setting where it's safe and where they feel supported.
I've also found that having positive peer role models in real life situations, not simulated situations, has been really effective in working with students and campers.
So let's talk about behavior. So we in the field of positive behavior supports know that if we're going to address the behavior, we have to define it first. What exactly are we looking to change? And usually we have to define that in observable and measurable terms. So when someone describes a challenging behavior as disrespectful or rude or mean, well, this looks very different to various people based on their cultural values and upbringing. So we have to define, what does that behavior specifically look like that we're wanting to address? So we use specific verbs. For example, you might describe a kid who is being harsh. You might then choose to describe his behavior as any sort of pushing, breaking items, destroying property, things like that, so that we have an objective behavior that we are measuring and targeting for reduction. So when we define a behavior that a team wants to address altogether, then there should be no question as to whether or not the behavior occurred, because we've defined it so precisely. So yes, all behaviors that we are targeting in any sort of behavior plan must be observable and measurable. So let's look at an example. Here is a professional, perhaps a doctor or psychologist, who's asking these parents to imagine a hyperactive child. So why don't you all take a second and just kind of imagine in your minds, when you envision a hyperactive child, what sort of pictures pop up in your head? So as you can see, here mom and dad have pretty different perspectives of what a hyperactive child looks like and what his or her behavior looks like. So you've got mom here, and she's envisioning a child who is throwing things, yelling, waving arms, pulling on the drapes, maybe kicking a little. And then dad envisions a kid who is fidgeting at his desk. He's having a hard time staying still, but he's not engaging in any sort of destructive behavior. So therefore, mom and dad are on a very different page about what behaviors need to be addressed. So we've got to get them defining that specific behavior in the same ways. It's really, really, really important to remember at your core that behavior is communication. Anytime any of us engage in a behavior, it's because we're wanting to communicate a desire or a need to someone else. And we particularly see that children, teens, and adults who struggle with communication tend to engage in more challenging behaviors. I often tell parents, imagine if you had tape over your mouth, or if you were in a land where you didn't speak the native language that everyone else spoke. Your frustration would mount, and you may eventually begin to engage in some challenging behaviors due to that frustration. So we've got to think, aren't there other more efficient and appropriate ways that a child or a teen can be taught to communicate so that they don't even have to use the challenging behavior anymore? So this is a really great way to conceptualize the reasons why any human being would engage in any sort of behavior. Even we as adults, we use our behavior because it serves a function or a purpose. And a good way to remember the 4 functions, the 4 common reasons behind behavior, is to remember this acronym, Everybody Eats, EATS. So the first function being escape. So these would be the times when we or a child might engage in a behavior in order to escape a situation that we don't want to be in. Whether it's we want to get away from a certain environment, or get away from a certain person, or get away from an activity that we don't like being involved with. The second function is attention. So this is any time that a person uses a behavior in order to get attention or a reaction from someone around them. Third, there's this tangible function. So anytime that a person will use the behavior in order to get access to an item or an activity that they prefer. So for example, using a behavior to get access to food, or to get access to technology or toys or games, or to get access to preferred activities like going outside or going to the grocery store, going to the mall. And then lastly, we have this sensory function. And the sensory function is quite different from the previous 3 because these are behaviors that occur simply because they feel good. We know a behavior is sensory when it would occur even when no one is around to deliver any sort of reinforcement. And you often see those types of behaviors amongst kids or teens with autism spectrum disorders or with sensory processing struggles. So here are some examples of how you would, some certain situations that might lead a child to use behavior in order to access or get away from something. So here's some examples of escape situations. So perhaps I am breaking my pencil because I don't want to do this difficult homework task. Or perhaps I am screaming because I want to be removed from a social situation that's really challenging. Or perhaps there's just a person around me I don't want to be around, and so I engage in a behavior because that's going to make that person leave. So kids, teens, and adults might seek attention, might use behavior to seek attention from parents or from teachers, from siblings or peers, simply anyone that they are seeking a desire to interact with. And then these are some pretty common examples of tangible items that we know kids will use challenging behaviors in order to get. So I want that toy, so I throw a tantrum in the store. Or I want my preferred food item, so I run across campus to go get that food item. so on and so forth. And then, of course, if it's a sensory behavior, I'm doing this behavior because it feels good, or something about it looks cool, I like the sound, or it tastes good, or it's just become a repetitive habit. Okay, so I'm going to encourage everyone to take a deep breath and try not to get so overwhelmed by everything that's on this chart. We're going to walk through it. So we, within the field of positive behavior support, have a structure for how we write behavior intervention plans. And we write them in a way so that the plan is specific to that behavior's function. Okay, because you might have one kid who's screaming in order to get attention, but you might have another kid who's screaming in order to get out of a situation they don't want to be in. So therefore, we're going to address those two situations very differently. So this is a really good planning chart to help you make sure that you are writing a plan specific to that function for that child. So the way that this works is we first start by identifying the things that have triggered that child's behavior in the past. So if it's attention being removed, then we would list that here. And we would immediately come down here to our modifications portion and say, well, how are we going to prepare this child for when we have to ignore them, or for when we have to change our attention away from them? How are we going to make that situation less challenging for them? Sometimes we choose to remove the triggers altogether. We might say we're just going to flood this child with attention throughout the day. Or we decide, yes, there are some times of the day where we're going to have to ignore the child, and therefore we're going to come up with some strategies to make that less challenging. So we're going to maybe give him access to something that can preoccupy his time, or set him up with a peer buddy when a camp counselor can't be giving attention to him. So this part here is all about prevention. How can we make those triggers less challenging to the child? How can we set up the environment in a way that is less stressful for the child, and in a way so that the behavior is less likely to occur? So prevention is one major component to a behavior plan. Another important component is teaching new skills. When any human being is using challenging behavior to communicate, then we need to teach them a new way to communicate. So, for example, if we have the targeted behavior, let's say we've got a camper who is, let's go back to running across the campus, running away from the group in order to go get access to his iPad. We need to teach him a new alternative. So instead of running in order to go get your iPad, what skill could that child learn in order to get his iPad? So we might teach him that he can request the iPad, or we might teach him that he has to stay with a group for a certain period of time and then he gets to go access his iPad. So basically here we're looking at what will the alternative be? How can we get him access to this preferred item in a way that is more acceptable than running away from the group? And of course, anytime that there is appropriate requests for preferred items or for attention, then we want to make sure we're reinforcing those new behaviors. We have to make sure that the old challenging behavior doesn't work anymore, and that the new behaviors are being reinforced. Meaning, if the student appropriately requests the iPad, then we're going to allow him to access it. Or if he appropriately stays with the group for a period of time, then we're going to allow him to access it. Or if a camper is in a situation where they're using their behavior to get out of a situation they don't want to be in, then we're going to teach them to request a break. Or we're going to teach them to request some space from the group, and then we're going to honor those requests.
So now we're going to talk a little bit more on how to prepare your church, your congregation, or your camp community to accept individuals with challenging behaviors. So we've had a request to talk about how to respond to specific behaviors. It's really difficult sometimes because, as Allison said earlier, different behaviors happen for different reasons, and every child is different. And so you have to figure out what the communication is for, why the child is behaving in a certain way, and what the triggers are, and what's going to work with that particular child. So a lot of these examples are things that might be helpful, but you also have to really examine the root of the behavior.
Right. And I actually really like this first behavior here because oftentimes we assume that if a person runs away from a situation, then they don't want to be in it. But I actually encounter quite a few kiddos that I work with who run away because they know it's going to get people to chase them. And that becomes fun. It's a fun cat and mouse chase game. So where we thought that we initially predicted that the child was using runaway to escape the situation, they're actually using it in order to get attention. So therefore, we're going to teach them more appropriate ways to request attention, or maybe we're going to build in chase into part of their camp day already so that they get that need met for that interaction. Same with being physically aggressive. You could have an individual who is aggressive because they want attention, or because they want to escape, or because they want some sort of tangible preferred item. And therefore, we have to really do some observing and concluding what that function is before we can come up with some prevention and replacement strategies. With regards to refusing to participate, that's usually, I think we can safely say that refusal to participate is due to the fact that participation is challenging or aversive. And there are quite a few ways that we could tackle that behavior. But the key is we want to plan ahead of time as opposed to being responsive to these types of situations. So if we know we have a camper who struggles with participation, then we want to come up with a way to prevent that refusal in the first place. We want to possibly offer them choices. You could offer them choices of which activity they're going to participate in, and that can be quite empowering. Or you can offer to have them make a choice of how long they're going to participate. Perhaps they're not willing to participate the whole 45 minutes of an activity, but they're willing to go in for about 10 minutes. So by presenting those options and maybe even giving that individual a preferred item to bring with them to the activity, then we're reducing the chance that they're going to refuse to participate anyways.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about these things as we go on. So one thing that can trigger some behaviors is mismedication management. I know a lot of well-intending parents who want to give their campers, their kids, a vacation from medication. There's a lot of medications that really have some adverse effects, especially on interaction and things like that. And they want their children to just be kids during the summer, but that's not always a great idea. It's really important for individuals to have their medicine and have it when they need it, and it really can affect their participation and their socialization. I've had campers who needed to have their meds at 7:45 when they wake up, just so they can get that bit of energy and motivation to move forward and get their morning chores done and get their shower and prepare for the day. If they don't get their medicine at the right time, then they're going to be sluggish and it's going to be really difficult to get things done. So really pay attention with regards to the time frame of when medicine is due. Some medicine should be taken with food, and you want to make sure that you have a snack if you're out on a field trip or something and the camper needs to take his medicine at 10 a.m. So it really is preparing ahead of time, understanding what meds you're dealing with, understanding that you really should encourage parents to continue to keep their kids on meds when they're part of your program. If they want to have vacation from meds on their time, that's great, but it should not hamper the child's interaction with fellow campers. So really be mindful of that and mindful of scheduling and who's going to be giving meds and things like that. So what we really want to do is be proactive. We don't want to be reactive in situations. And so there are lots of ways we can be proactive, and we want to set our staff and volunteers up for success. So when you're doing things like staff training, you want to do some specialized staff training around autism and other types of disabilities that you might be working with. So set aside some time to really prepare the staff and volunteers to really understand who they're working with and kind of some general knowledge. And before the individuals arrive, the campers being the individuals, you really want to prepare the staff and volunteers and give them information and strategies. You can collect information all sorts of ways. The camp I worked at in college, we had some of the same campers come year after year after year, and we would collect information each year about strategies that worked, that didn't work, campers' likes, dislikes, and we were really able to tailor our events around the campers that we were going to have because we knew what worked, what didn't work ahead of time. Sometimes it's hard when you have a new camper, and we'll talk a little bit more about getting information from parents later, but the best thing you can do is know who your campers are going to be and get the staff and volunteers any information and strategies ahead of time. Another good piece to train counselors on is natural and logical consequences. Camp is a great place for natural and logical consequences. It is a safe environment to teach some really, really important lessons. So my favorite natural and logical consequence example is refusing to take a raincoat. So it's the summertime, it's not freezing cold outside, it's about to rain, but it's not raining yet, and you're leaving wherever your base camp is, and little Tommy does not want to take his raincoat. He does not see the point, and you're getting into a power struggle, and once you get into a power struggle, that's never good. So disengage and say, okay, Tommy, just so you know, if you don't take your raincoat and it starts to rain, you are going to get wet. Do you understand? He says, yes, I understand. So you go to your activity, and it starts pouring down rain, and he gets drenched. It's not cold outside, like I said, so you don't have to worry about his physical safety so much. It's just going to be a little uncomfortable. We don't want students, campers, to be put in situations that are going to be harmful, but we also want them to be able to learn and make educated decisions for the future. So it's really important that once he gets wet and he's really uncomfortable, that you really talk through why taking the raincoat might not have been the best, or not taking the raincoat might not have been the best choice, and think through and talk through why would it be important in the future to take your raincoat, and really give that opportunity to learn immediately from that experience. That's one of the easiest examples, but there's lots of other examples about natural and logical consequences. You really want to be able to link the consequence to the action or the behavior. There's a lot of work around arbitrary, you're getting time out, Why? How is timeout linked to that behavior? So you really want to make a connection, because that's how individuals learn. And you don't just learn from making the mistake. You learn from talking through what's going to be a better decision in the future to keep this situation from happening.
And to kind of piggyback on that too, it can be helpful to instill faith that you believe that the camper can make a better choice next time. A lot of times we just have to detail the consequences and how they were related to the initial choice. But sometimes it's helpful to follow up with a brief statement along the lines of, I trust that you will choose to get your jacket next time. Once we communicate this faith that that person knows how to improve their behavior and make good choices, then they're going to have more confidence in their ability to make those choices in the future as well.
Like I said before, be proactive, not reactive. A great way to be proactive is to prepare for transitions. Transitions are hard for lots of people, not just individuals with autism, not just individuals with disabilities. I have issues with transition. I don't like change. And if I'm doing something I really enjoy, it's really hard to get me excited about moving to the next thing that might not be so interesting. So when I was a camp director, part of our requirements, part of our day was transition groups. In between every activity, we had a defined transition. So let's say we're all playing on the soccer field. It's time to go to the swimming pool. We take a minute. We tell everyone, hey, in 5 minutes, we're gonna stop this activity. So you let people know how much longer they have. And then you stop, you circle up, you have a moment to say, hey, wasn't that great playing on the soccer field? So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to swim time at the pool. And you might run through a list of things that they need to do, like we're gonna go change into our swimsuits, we're gonna take a shower, then we're gonna go sit on the side of the pool, and then we're gonna get in the pool when the lifeguard says they're ready. So you wanna prepare them for the next activity, and you really want to create an end to the previous activity. I think it's a great practice to do with any groups, because that way you get everyone together and then you're able to move to the next group activity together, and you're able to kind of run down what other instructions or things that you need. So I think that's a great way to incorporate transitions and transition groups into what you're doing. Another great way to be proactive is to have picture schedules and communication pictures. We have lots of campers who don't use formal language, who have difficulty reading. Picture schedules are just fun in general to make. So we would make picture schedules for our whole week at a time and show what we were doing, different activities. That way, individuals can know what's upcoming. There's a lot of anxiety that can be created when you don't know what's next. If it's a mystery event, that's one thing, but usually there's no good reason to just keep things quiet, keep things a surprise. I would always err on the side of letting individuals know what they're going to do. Now, if there's something that could be iffy that day, you're going to tell them that it might be iffy and we might do something different. I would prepare ahead of anything else. Just prepare people for what's going to take place. Because being proactive is so much easier than dealing with the aftermath of some kind of disappointment because things weren't communicated clearly.
And just to add on that, it's important to keep in mind that there are two basic forms of communication. One being expressive, so our ability to say things to others or communicate wants and needs to others. But there's also this form of communication called receptive communication, which is understanding what other people are saying, understanding other people's expectations of us. And while you may have a camper who is talking and is verbal, don't underestimate how much they might struggle with that receptive piece. So understanding expectations, understanding what other people are saying to them. And that's really where these visual supports, these visual schedules can be super powerful. That way they have a visual depiction of what to expect when maybe the verbal communication to them is not fully going through.
So I know a lot of you are working with Spectrum on this, and so here are a few things that Spectrum uses to help staff and volunteers be successful. So Spectrum has backpacks for staff to carry around that have items in there that can be used to help calm down or redirect campers or reinforce behaviors. So there are reinforcers in there. So it might be some type of reward, stickers or coins or whatever the camper needs to be reinforced. There are things, sensory toys and snacks. Snacks can be good because sometimes, you know, the issue might be a little drop in blood sugar and you get a little irritable. So maybe having a little snack is important. And then really, sensory sensitivity can often create some behaviors, and these can be avoided. And think about how they can be avoided. You know, if students are going on a field trip and you're getting ready to go somewhere that might have a train nearby, having that really loud noise might really interfere with someone's sensory sensitivity. And there's great ways that you can avoid those situations by getting things like noise reduction headphones. When I was a camp director, every 4th of July, we would have fireworks. And we would have a lot of students that were on the spectrum and that really did not like the loud noises, but they really did enjoy the beautiful fireworks. So we invested in some sound reducing headphones, and the campers were then able to really enjoy what was going on. So there are some easy ways to avoid situations that really could raise the anxiety because of a sensitivity.
Yes, and if your camp isn't already speaking with parents about specific reinforcers that are motivating to that child, go ahead and have that conversation with them. More often than not, parents are willing to provide those reinforcers. There might be a specific fidget toy that really works to calm the child down at school or at home, or perhaps there's a specific snack that the child really finds motivating and that we can use to reinforce appropriate behaviors and participation, and get those things in the backpack so that we've got a toolkit full of motivators for that child. Okay, so if a majorly dangerous behavioral situation occurs, obviously everyone's safety is first and foremost. So the best plan is to take other children from the room or to another activity as calmly as possible so that they can be safe and so that they are not scared. That's where your tone, your calmness is really going to be super critical. Additionally, you always want to make sure that you have 2 staff members at least sticking behind with the child who's having some struggles. You never want to leave a staff person alone with a child. This can be overwhelming, especially if the behavior escalates, and it could be dangerous to both the child and the camp counselor. Additionally, if we know that dangerous behavioral situations have happened in the past, sometimes we may need to modify a child's schedule to accommodate their needs. Sometimes we might just say, this camper, it's too difficult for him to be in hot weather, and being outside for long periods of time usually causes some sort of behavioral outburst. We can always then just offer that camper an alternative activity Or we can offer to have them still dip their toes in the water and participate in the activity for 5 to 10 minutes and then offer them a break. And then, of course, use your decompressing tools that you've got all in your Spectrum backpack.
I also want to encourage not to use the TV or video games or technology as an offered alternative activity. Sometimes you might have to resort to this, but I would strongly discourage it unless this is your last and final option, because sometimes that's what kids really want. And so they're going to exhibit some negative behavior in order to get technology, because at home or in other situations, technology is readily available. But I feel like camp and being a part of a group at church, those things are really something special and different. And a child should really be engaging as much as they can with others and activities and being part of the community, and not just escaping to a television or an iPad or something like that. Those are great for different situations, but I think if you're going to send your child to camp, that child needs to be participating as much as they can and not just trying to escape to do something that is comfortable and easy. So those are my opinions on technology and camp. Your biggest resource is going to be parents. Parents are going to know what's going on with their child and what works and what doesn't work. There are situations that parents aren't going to know about that arise only at camp and that no one is really prepared for. And we understand that. But it's really important to get as much information from the parents ahead of time. So I like to interview parents. It's okay to grill parents. You want to get as much information to set their camper up for success as possible. So what you need to understand is, why do they want their child to be at camp? Is it because they need childcare, which is perfectly all right? Or is it because they want their camper to have an experience with others or be in nature or all of the above, but really get the motivation on why send their kids to camp? Also, you want to find out if the child has spent any significant time away from home. It's really important that kids have the opportunity to get away from home, whether it's at a grandparent's house, an aunt's or uncle's house, a cousin's, even just a friend. There are lots of people who would be great to have campers go and spend some time away from home. Because if a student or a camper isn't prepared for time away from home, that can be pretty difficult, especially if it's overnight. You want to know if the camper has been to camp before and what their experiences were like. If they had a really bad, crummy experience, then they might be exhibiting behaviors because they want to get out of the camp experience, not because of anything that the camp has done, but because of a previous experience that they're assuming is going to happen at camp as well. So really understand. And then if they really liked their experiences at camp, what was it that they liked? And how can you recreate those moments and give those kids another experience that will be enjoyable? You want to know what the camper's attitude is about going to camp. If they have had a bad experience or they're really negative about it, then you're going to want to know that when they show up, and you're going to want to work with the parents to create some really positive strategies for engaging that camper. And you want to know what the child's exact diagnosis is, because that can affect their interactions and how they react to things. And even knowing kind of medical history and those types of things are really critical to being able to understand where a camper is coming from. And then what strategies work and don't work with the child. If you know that giving someone a timeout, a break, a 5-minute break from a stressful situation works, use it. If you know that just giving them a fidget toy to hold on to throughout the day works, do that. But also know what doesn't work and avoid that, because you're just going to be spinning your wheels and getting into power struggles, and you want to avoid that at all costs. You also want to know, is the child physically or verbally aggressive? And you want to figure out, what situations have surrounded these incidents. Maybe there are situations that would never, ever, ever happen at camp, so you don't have to worry about it. Maybe they have issues with one particular person and they act out when that particular person is around. Well, that person's not going to be around camp, so you're good. So you want to know what is going on and will those situations happen at camp. And then you want to be prepared, and you want to ask parents what their strategies have been. And sometimes it's okay to ask if the child is seeing a counselor or a psychologist, and it might be helpful to talk to them after you get the permission and sign permission. But we had consent forms at the camp I worked for, so we could talk to lots of different people, so we could get a really good feel for what's going to be best for this camper. You can talk to teachers as well. They have a lot of experience in kind of similar situations. So use your resources and just prepare as much as you can ahead of time.
Okay, so coming up with a behavior plan appropriate to an individual. So we've emphasized this quite a bit. Being proactive is super, super important because it reduces the stress of the camp counselors when challenging behaviors arise. And then it really keeps everyone organized and flowing within an agreed upon plan so that management of those behaviors is easier or more easily done. So it's important to keep in mind these plans should be individualized. There's no one-size-fits-all behavior management plan. It has to be tailored to the needs and the strengths and the weaknesses within that child. So you might decide part of a behavior plan for a certain camper is that they need a one-on-one aid all day long. They need the additional support, they need a lot of attention, and they're less likely to use challenging behaviors when they have a one-on-one designated to them. Or perhaps you dedicate that child to a specific group. Perhaps they're buddied up with a group of peers who are they don't tend to demonstrate the triggers that would lead to challenging behavior, or perhaps they just have a more patient and tolerant demeanor. Maybe they've been around that child in the past and the child feels comfortable with them. Additionally, you're going to need to determine at what points in time are we going to allow natural consequences to occur versus really coming up with some specific prevention strategies and some reinforcement strategies that we have built in to try and increase the positive behavior. And then sometimes point systems are really super powerful, meaning we as the team have got a good sense of what positive behaviors we want to see out of that child, whether it's participating with a group or asking nicely for things that the child wants, or sharing, taking turns, whatever that list may be for that specific child. We come up with a point system where once they have earned points, and because they've been using these positive behaviors, then we deliver some sort of reward. Perhaps it's special playtime with a friend, or a special snack, or some sort of break away from the group to just chill out and do what the camper wants to do for 5 minutes. So point systems can be super, super powerful in motivating that child to use the positive behaviors that you're wanting to increase.
All right. So final thoughts. It's really important to remember, and I know we've said this several times, but every child is different, no matter what their diagnosis is. So interventions have to be tailored to fit the child. There's no one size fits all. There's no one intervention for behavior. You have to really take into account who the child is, what's going on. So there is no real recipe that will cover everything. Also, what's really important to know is that these strategies can work with any child, not just children on the autism spectrum. Positive behavior supports are universal, and tailoring them to the child is what's important, not necessarily the diagnosis. So really understanding that you can use these strategies with anyone.
Okay, so we are at this point going to open up the floor for questions. We've got some folks sending in some messaged questions, and one of the questions here is, what if you have a camp counselor who works alongside you and does not seem to be implementing the behavior strategies the way that the team had agreed? So that's a really good question. When you've got multiple staff members working with a child, this is true in schools, this is even true in families where there's so many different adults responding to the child's behavior, it makes the chances that everyone's going to respond in different ways even higher. And consistency is super, super, super key. So your concern is really, really valid. So what I would do is try to convene the team and come at it from a perspective of, what do you think, but I would ask that camp counselor directly, what do you think specifically we need to add or change in the plan so that we can help this camper be more successful? A lot of times, coming to the people who should be implementing the plan with an invitation to hear their ideas and to hear their suggestions makes it more likely that they're then going to go implement that plan. If we come to them with the approach of, you're not doing what we said what we talked about, then that tends to create some defensiveness and may not be effective in getting that camp counselor to start to implement things consistently. So get everyone on the same page, get that person's input, allow them to share their ideas, and hopefully that can remedy the situation.
All right, Allison, I have two questions and I think they're very related. So I'm just going to ask them both and you can answer them how you think best. So one is, why do you reward behaviors that other campers do in the first place? And if you get a question from another camper, why are you giving Sally special attention for doing something that I'm already doing? So they're very similar questions.
Right. So this is it's a tricky situation, and a lot of us as practitioners or camp counselors, we really struggle with how to respond in these situations because, this camper's question is valid. They want to be treated fairly. They want everyone to be getting the same rights and privileges. But at the same time, you don't want to go into a long, detailed conversation about why that child with challenging behaviors, has a diagnosis, or you just don't want to go into too much detail about their personal stuff. So I find that the best way to respond to that is saying, everyone needs different things to be successful. And some of us are still trying to learn how to participate or how to get along or whatever the challenge is at the time. But keeping it in general terms, like we all have different needs. We all require, maybe not require, we all need a different type of support. And we're just trying to help all of you have the best camp ever. And keeping it general like that should squash the conversation at that point.
What about the professionals who are thinking we're rewarding?
Yes. So oftentimes I hear this phrase, well, she shouldn't do what's right because she expects to get something out of it. She should do what's right because that's just what we expect of her. And if my response to that is, if setting our expectations was enough to change a child's behavior, then it would have changed already. We have to look at the needs and the motivators specific to that child. And fair is not everyone getting the same thing. Fair is everyone getting what they need in order to be successful. And that quote can be really, really powerful.
Here's another question that's sort of related as well, but I've heard a lot when someone is exhibiting a behavior that they just know better. So they know better, so they should do better. How would you respond to that?
So my response to that would be, that's a really tricky one. And I'm reflecting back on the times when I've been asked that in the past, and I'm trying to remember my precise response. So I would kind of respond similarly to the previous question, which is, if this child knew better, then they would be already engaging in the positive behavior. So I might provide some education on how there are different forms of communication, and while we might have a kiddo who appears to know right from wrong, they may be struggling to understand expectations, they might be struggling with sensory issues, and that can really get in the way of a kid acting the way that we expect them to. So, I would just respond with, right now, if we were to take data, the data would show us that setting our expectations in and of itself is not working. So we've got to build in some prevention strategies. We've got to build in some reward strategies so that we can see over time in our data that challenging behavior goes down over time and positive behavior goes up over time.
Well, I think that's about it. So we are done here, but we are available to you if you have any more specific questions. So thank you so much for spending some time on this webinar and learning about positive behavior supports and including students with challenging behaviors. You can reach us at the emails right here. I'm at Susanna, or I'm at smiller65@gsu.edu.
And I'm at aohara@gsu.edu.
And if you're interested in anything that we're doing here at the CLD, you can visit our website as well.
And of course, here are your Spectrum Camp points of contact, Claire Dees and Dan Britt. And we appreciate your time today, and we hope you all have a great summer. Thanks for all the work you do with these campers.
Thanks.